there's an effort to share with us some of the research behind how research is developed. Now, we would all know there's a small comparison between what the current situation is and what the desired situation is in the schools. Now, currently, what we would see is that students are interested in learning and performance, but that's primarily driven by either social pressures by parents, either peers or even schools to perform, and also the fear of failure. So the motivation is that I don't want to fail, I don't want to be left behind. Examinations and tests are the one that start and induce learning in a child, and the learning is becoming very stressful. Now, what we would actually desire is that the student learning and performance is driven by interests of students in various facets of education. Their whole performance should be driven by their interest in either mathematics or music or arts. It should not be fear-driven environment or a pressure-driven environment in the school. And eventually, we want learning to be enjoyable. And that learning can be enjoyable only if it's driven by the interest of the child and not necessarily the social pressure or the fear of an examination. And that is why we see suddenly, students getting more serious in class 12th, and they're not as serious in class 11th because they understand that 11th is not a board year. And then suddenly when the board year comes, you see everybody from day one getting into the books and getting more serious about it. So that's a clear evidence. And the similar thing happened in class 10. Till 9th, they would take it easy. They would not worry about, getting involved in academics. And then suddenly in class 10, because it's the board year, parents start talking about it. Ye saal board ka saal hai. And even the teachers start saying, "Ki ab masti ke din khatam ho gaye," and this is the board year. So it's the board year that is pushing them to perform, not necessarily their interests. And that should be a matter of concern to all of us. Now, I wanted this not to be an opinion, my opinion. So I wanted this didactic to be based on research. And I got hold of this one wonderful paper, which is pretty recent. In fact, 18-year-old paper in research is considered pretty recent. So it's a paper written by Sylvia from California, the University of California. And Interests, the Psychology of Constructive Criticism. Now, this has been shared on our website also and also on our groups, and I would really strongly encourage you to read this paper. It is deep. It's tough to read, but hopefully after the didactic, you would get motivated to read it further since you will understand the framework of it. Now, before I get into how developing interests happen, I need to just share with you what is the difference between interest and interests. So when we talk about interest, that's just a positive emotion. We're talking about a state of emotion. It's an emotional experience. So when I say emotion, it's a feeling, it's a mood, it's attitude, but it lasts for a short duration. So I could be going into a shopping mall and I would be, just hanging around, and suddenly something in the show window of a shop would catch my attention. I would get interested and I will walk into that store. Now that moment, that momentary feeling that lasts for a short duration, that could be started with the price of a product or just the way the product looks. I get interested in that product and I walk into the store to figure out whether I can own that product or no. And so that is so interest in general is an emotion. It motivates me to do something, right? And primarily interest, the emotion of interest is what is behind cultivating knowledge or diversifying experiences. So for example, the reason why all of us have gathered on ICSL ECHO program and we have logged in because there is a feeling of interest. There is a positive emotion. The interest has been generated and we have logged in onto our computers to take part in this program. And that's going to help us cultivate knowledge or give a different experience. So some of us might be here because this is a novel experience, and some of us might be here because it's actually going to help us grow our knowledge. However, when we talk about interests in general, that is a product of emotional interest, but that is an aspect of your personality. So when we talk about interests, as in the plural part, we are referring to, and when I say we, I mean the research paper. So we is not in general. So the author of the paper talks about interests in terms of an aspect of personality. So one of my interests, for example, is mathematics. That's part of my personality. It's something that is, and that's going to endure. It's going to stay all the time. And as I pursue my interests in mathematics, I will be developing a lot of skills and expertise as I go forward. So interest, right now, what we want to understand is that interest is a short duration emotion, positive emotion, which helps us cultivate knowledge and gives us different experiences. Whereas interests is part of a personality in terms of our student also. Now, the important thing for us to remember is that of all the things that interest a person, very few form the person's interests. So I could be interested, I could get interested in watching a movie on a Friday evening because that is the best choice, but that might not really form part of what my interests in life are. So I think that's the differentiation we need to understand at this point. Now, here's the model of how, Sylvia, the model that he presents is how do interests develop. So this part, developed interests, is the personality part of it, right? So it's a plural, as you can see. It's easy to miss that S, and that is the reason why I need to amplify that point. We want students, when they graduate from our school, when they leave school, we need to give them certain developed interests that they can pursue throughout their life, and they can learn from those interests. And now that interest could be in anything. It could be mathematics, it could be social work, it could be charity, it could be, arts, music, whatever we want. But we want them to go ahead from life, from our school, with a set of developed interests that they use to grow further in life. Now, the starting point of developing interests is actually the emotional experience of interest. So when students start experiencing the interest as an emotion, right, that's the starting point. And the more, and what we're going to see in the next few slides is how exactly this model takes shape. Now, if we try to figure out how do students, or anybody for that matter, I mean, this could also be true for your teachers. If you want your teachers to be interested in using teaching aids, and they should be passionately using new innovative methods, that interest also develops through the same model. So it's not just for students, it's also for teachers and also for everybody. Now, this paper says that there are multiple ways that a student or an individual can experience the emotion of interest. And he puts that into three segments. So one is the internalization process. I'm going to go in the details of this. The second is transformation process. And the third is collective variable. So we need to study what these three aspects are. Now, any of these three aspects can induce an emotion of interest in an individual, right? And it's not necessarily that all of these factors may induce interest in each individual. So what I'm trying to say here is that there could be some students who might experience an interest in something because of qualitative variables. Some would experience interest because of transformation processes, and some would experience interest based on internalization process. So as a school leader, we need to understand all of these three factors, because we are not sure which factor will work for which student or which teacher. So we need to have a very holistic environment and a holistic strategy of allowing our students to experience interest. So I'm going to go over in this presentation, the next 10 minutes or so that are remaining. I would like to go over these three steps, and because this is a pretty deep thing, I've decided to divide this into two didactics. So in the first didactic, I'm going to be discussing these three variables. And in the next didactic, I'll talk about the magnification process and how the pedagogical strategies need to be implemented. So we'll break this into two didactics because it's just so deep. So let me quickly begin. What do we mean when we say interest is induced by internalization? Now, the process by which, so what kind of these interests are? Interest induced by internalization refers to the process by which the structures of society become the structures of our own consciousness. Now, that was a paper published in 1963 by Berger. And what that means is that the world we live in, our social world, which has certain ideas, certain attitudes, certain roles, and we can see that how people get interested because of social behavior and the structure of the society with this recent, protests that have started happening on CAB. It started from Jamia, it went on to AMU, and now it's Chennai, and it's so many places. So the structure and the ideas and the attitudes of the society and the social world are actually making more and more people relate to that particular protest, and every university is now having a protest. So that's a very recent example of. But in a case when we are talking about a school, what does that mean? This means that students can experience interest in an activity because their parents, their friends, or society in general are interested in that activity. So if there is a child whose parents are very interested in watching movies or reading books, for example, these two things, suddenly you will start seeing that the child will also be interested in movies or books, whatever the parents think of it as an interest. So if we really want to develop interests in students, it is important for us. This yellow box will tell you what we need to take action on, and this is the blue box is the relevance of the research to our schools. So what as schools we need to do is we need to also understand what students, parents, or friends are interested in. So we cannot ignore the hobbies, the interests of parents when we are trying to identify and help students. They might just be interested in becoming a doctor because all of this child's uncle and aunts are doctors, and because that's the environment, and therefore without understanding what it means to be a doctor, that child becomes interested in becoming a doctor. Now that's how the structure of the society in which he lives. Similarly, a child whose whole family is into business might start getting interested in business because at the dinner table, only business is spoken about. Everybody is interested in business. And similarly, PUBG. We are going to be doing a case later on about a child getting addicted in PUBG. Now, how do children get interested in digital games? Because their friends are interested in digital games. And that's how it all spreads. And we need to educate parents on how their own interests may get reflected in the interest of the students. I think this is the step that we can take. The second factor in internalization is self-determination. Now, we have seen cases where a child is very interested in speaking English, but communicating in English, but none of his family members know how to speak English, or they don't even have an English newspaper coming. But this child is very passionate about learning. Now that is a result of the self-determination approach. So interest can also be experienced as a result of cultivating competence, self-determination, and relatedness. So and this is the case that we see a lot of times, that a child from a rural setting who doesn't come from a very educated family figures out that he wants to be a IAS officer at a later stage, and that self-determination makes him interested in anything that will help him become an IAS officer. Now, in that case, now this approach is different from the previous approach we were talking about. And we don't know which student would internalize an interest based on which approach. So that is the reason why we need to monitor all of these things together. So this is an example that I just took about English speaking. It could be, we've just seen a child of an auto rickshaw driver getting into IIT. Now we would wonder, how did this child get into IIT? But that could be the child's self-determination that is making him really push hard and getting interested in mathematics and physics and sciences, because he wants to prove it to himself that he wants to be part of the society. So what we need to do is, if we really want that to happen, and we find these determined children, and if they want to develop a competence, then we need to relate the activities to the competencies that they want to develop. And we need to show them how, any particular activity will help them achieve their own objectives or their choices. That is one way. So as a more concrete example, mathematics as quadratic equations and calculus, but I don't tell them that how understanding this aspect of mathematics could help them in their life goals, could help them in the objectives that they have chosen for themselves. Then I would not be able to make them interested in mathematics also. I'm just sending it as a discrete topic to be done. The third very, very important aspect is internalization by socialization. And both Berger and Mead in their paper say that the core of the process by which people locate themselves in the society is what socialization is, right? And people follow the perspectives of significant others and reference groups. Now, this is for adolescents, for children who are, in middle school, and maybe even primary school nowadays, because children are evolving very fast. They have their own perception of who are the significant others. Now, this could be one of their uncles who drives a very, big car, and he is seen as successful in the family. So he becomes a very important part of their club of significant others. And they also have reference groups. So what that means for us as schools is that we should understand that the child's ideas, the values and the activities that they get interested in is actually, it could be influenced by the social groups that they get to see. And for that reason, it's important for the schools to expose students to significant individuals, get alumni to come to our schools, talk about what they do as doctors, their work and their contributions to society, or maybe get a painter involved in different facets of people. We need groups of professionals to come into the school and share their experiences with students, because students need to identify the right significant others to follow. If they start following Akshay Kumar and they start following, Shah Rukh Khan and, Kareena Kapoor, then obviously they are more interested towards performing, music or dance in a live reality TV show. Although there's nothing wrong with that. That's also part of their growth. But the options is something that we can provide them of choosing the best possible group that they would like to associate with. And because that particular group is associated with some interests, the student should start getting associated with that interest. So these three that I have spoken about, the socialization, the self-determination approach, and the interests induced by internalization. Now, these three are three methods of how this particular process works, the internalization processes. And we need to now understand the transformation processes as to how do they play a part in helping child experience interest, the emotion of interest. So I'll quickly go on to that part. Okay, so here is the 2 points that the research paper mentions about transformation processes. First is that anything indifferent or repellent becomes of interest when seen as a means to an end, already commanding attention. Now, this was John Dewey. We all know him as a great contributor to educational psychology. 1913 is when he wrote this. It's a long time, but it's still, that's the early research that happened. So what does that really mean for us? How do we translate that into our understanding from these words? Is that, let's assume, I mean, the example that the paper gives is very nice, that suppose a child is interested in playing guitar, and he would definitely want to love to play guitar. Then he would also get interested in reading sheet music, although that's a very boring task. But when we explain him that reading sheet music would make him a better guitar player, then he would start getting interested in reading sheet music also. Now, similarly, if a child is interested in, let's say, cricket, right? And if I can show him how mathematics or study of mathematics or, something else, I can only talk about mathematics. So if mathematics can help him become a better cricket player, then he will, even though he is scared of maths or the idea of doing maths is repellent for him, he would still start showing interest in mathematics because he feels that doing mathematics will help him be a better cricketer. So that's what Dewey is trying to point out. And the second theory, which is more recent, is of cognitive dissonance theory. Inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes help to amplify the interest quotient of an activity and build consistency by using the least effort principle. Now, this is a very important aspect. So what does this? Let me just make this simpler and not just a jargon of words. Is that, let's assume, so the example that the paper gives is very interesting, that when students join the MBA classes in the US, they are encouraged to take up golf as a hobby. Now, that is done for the purpose because golf is considered a great networking opportunity for most business professionals. Now, they are encouraged, not rather forced, they're encouraged to take up golf as a hobby. And initially, golf is a lot of effort. Now, once they start playing golf, because they're not getting anything out of it, there's no external reward of playing golf at that point of time. They start giving importance to golf by changing their attitude towards golf. So they start thinking of golf as an interesting activity, even though that's taking up a lot of their effort. So that's cognitive dissonance theory. And I would, if you have questions, I can go over any one of these points in detail later on. Now, for schools, what does that mean? For us, what does that mean? That it means that boring, indifferent, repellent activities can transform, and that's why it's called a transformation process, that can transform into interesting activities under certain conditions. And these conditions are that if this particular activity that he finds boring is related to an activity they already find interesting, and if it involves significant effort but offers no extrinsic reward. So, suppose, for example, that we make them do yoga every day as a matter of routine for 20 minutes every day, they might find it very, very, effort, full of effort, and there is no reward of immediate reward of doing yoga. But over a period of time, they would change their attitude. Some of the students, not all of them, would change their attitude towards yoga, and they will start finding it an interesting activity to join. So that's the transformation process. And the last part is the qualitative variables that induce interest. Now, in 1960, was this research done, which actually is one of the most detailed studies of how interest is induced. And the core idea of this research was conflict, that conflict creates curiosity and curiosity creates interest. But there is a very thin line that we need to understand, is that if the conflict is very large, then the fear will happen, and if the conflict is small, then curiosity will exist. So I think this part is really important. That if the conflict between existing and new is very big, then things will go out of hand. So we need to manage that difference. Going very fast into what these four qualitative variables are, which is my last slide for today, is there are four variables. One is novelty, complexity, uncertainty, and the conflict of conflicting possibility. Now, these four variables, if they can be implemented in our school in terms of culture as well as pedagogical methods, then it is very highly likely that students will start developing interest in a few things. So just to give you one example, mathematics and geometry is considered pretty boring, that we teach. But let's assume that I walk into a class with a set of oranges and I cut open an orange, and then suddenly I ask them to draw whatever they see after they cut an orange. And when they draw that particular shape, I can easily explain them what a sector of a circle is by looking at each of those parts that the slide of that orange makes. So if you have not tried that, try it. When you cut an orange into two halves, you will see what a sector of a circle is. Now, this is a novel way of explaining a concept in geometry. And if I can inculcate these variables, these four variables, into my pedagogical methods, our students would get more interested.
So, any questions? I saw a couple of chats coming in. So, and if anybody has anybody to share very quickly, please raise your hand. Anybody had? Okay, Sir, Dr. Suraj Prakash, sir. Yes, please go ahead.
Good morning to all of you. And Atul, really, it is very well prepared talk, and the need of our, the way you explained the researches there. What I request you, if you could get some researches from India, that's very important. We have got Western philosophers, the work done by, you see, maybe that Arvindo, or work done by Krishnamurti Foundation, all these things. But what I find, you see, what you are saying is that the components, the first thing you said, you give the example of, you see, when we cut and you see an orange and all that there. So how to engage children, that's the first part. Give them, you see, power to explore, that's second. Then elaborate, and then you see, explain and evaluate, the 5 E cycles there. He said very rightly that we should have the contextualization there. In what context? I mean, teaching in India, in what part there, that's very, very important. I think this is very well prepared, and I'm sure that this will be uploaded, and wonderful. Congratulations, very well done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think, yeah, you have, yeah, so application is very important. And I think that's what Dr. Atul will be dealing with in the next session also. And I saw a raised hand. Miss Sonia, did you raise a hand? Did anybody else want any comment? And I see that on our chat, we have Mr. Anand Krishna Swami has said that conflict leading to curiosity has been the modus operandi of all fiction writers and movie script writers as well. And I think Ms. Shilpi has sent a comment saying, could you please explain how two aspects of transformation process are different? They appear similar to me. So this question is for you, Dr. Atul.
Process transformation, but there were two different research. One was earlier done by John Dewey, and what this primarily means is I am linking a new activity to something um, that I already find interesting. So the sequence is slightly different. There are two activities. One I don't find interesting, and one I find interesting. So John Dewey said that if the uninterested or the boring, let me call it boring, the boring activity is seen to help me achieve uh, the end results of the interesting activity, then I would automatically start finding an interest in that activity. So there are two activities. One is boring. One is an interesting activity. In the cognitive dissonance theory, there is just one activity which I find boring. I am indifferent to it. Okay, there is no extrinsic reward that I can see. There is a lot of effort required in doing that. So it's the same activity, but your attitude is changing. While in the first case, what John Dewey said is there are two different activities, one boring, one interesting, but they are linked to the outcomes of the interesting activity. So I hope I have been able to clarify that.
What we need to take it from here is how to ensure that there is a slight conflict to build that curiosity in children, rather than giving them ready-made content, rather than giving everything for by the teacher, ensuring that there is something that they need to derive, and in the process learn, and allowing them to make a couple of mistakes, fruitful mistakes, and learn from them. Were there any other questions? Sangeeta ma'am, did you have anything to comment?
What I feel in this boring activities, when children participate in them, they also generate interest in them. Therefore, the need for wider exposure at an early age is very important to develop interest and interests. Very important in both at the parental level as well at the school level, to be to able to generate interests in children. We need to provide wider exposure, proper role modeling, and role modeling does not necessarily come from the immediate environment. Sometimes exposure, like in our childhood, we were shown movies, great movies of biopics of great people, which kind of inspired us and wanted to imbibe things that they did. I mean, all that, it's a multifarious activity, multi-pronged approach one has to take.
Sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Lakshmi ma'am has raised her hand, and there are a couple of chats which were sent. So we'll first go to Lakshmi ma'am, and then I'll just read out Sonia ma'am's and Anand sir's comments. Yes, Lakshmi
Yeah.
ma'am, go ahead.
Hello, ma'am. Good morning. Ma'am, I would like to share something to what Atul sir just spoke about, how to develop interest among students, especially through activities. In our primary and middle school level in our school, most of our lesson plans are developed to cater three types of learners. One is a visual learner, one is the auditory, and one is the kinesthetic learner. Now, the research proves that most of the learners are visual learners. So what we do is we use the PowerPoint presentations or the PPTs prepared by the teachers to support the content what we have to teach. This may even replace the lecture given by the teacher in order to involve the students visually and through, and also by hearing. Thereby, we are able to generate curiosity among the students to like the content what we are teaching. Probably follow up that particular activity through questions and through comprehension questions to check the content whether it's understood by the students or not. We also support the content with activities to cater to kinesthetic learners with hands-on activities, so that this results in real life experiences, and this also results in helping them to relate the content to real life, so that lifelong learning takes place in the class. As Dr. Atul said, with the help of the orange, we tried that with using orange for introducing division among the grade 2 students, because division is one of the mathematical operation which they find it very difficult to understand. We also had a parent volunteer coming in, which excited the students a lot, because parents usually don't come into our school. So we got a very supportive parent who came in, gave oranges to the students and told them to demonstrate how an orange can help in learning division and subtraction at the same time. And we also noticed that we got a feedback from the parents after the session that the students were, every time the students had an orange, they would relate to what is addition, division and subtraction. So I think in this way, if we are able to generate curiosity by catering to all three learners in every lesson what we teach, irrespective of the subject what we are teaching, we can use all kinds of activities to cater to these three levels, types of learners in many different ways. So what we did was, we later on developed lesson plans catering to all three types of learners. That means every topic will have, every lesson in every subject will have three types of activities to cater to three types of learners. And believe me, it has given us a wonderful results with regard to generating curiosity among students. And we've been very happy with that kind of an approach what we have taken.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lakshmi ma'am. And I'm sure all of us will learn, and many of us perhaps are already doing it. And the next session also, some, Dr. Atul will be talking about them, and you could also present a case. So we have Sonia Sharma comment, government education policy regarding grading system till class 8th. Students are permitted to go to the next class even though they have E grade. Is this a reason why students have less interest in studies? I defer to you, Dr. Atul, but like if I were to say, I don't think that is a reason. That's kind of a, the child is already demotivated, that the child who's getting a E grade, there may be many reasons for it. And of course, failure like this or labeling like this would definitely demotivate a child. Did you have anything to say, Dr. Atul, about that?
See, I would not really worry about whether the auto promotion policies of the government are a factor on kids to lose interest in studies. But I think instead of figuring out the factors why they lose interest in studies, we need to focus on what are the ways in which interest can be developed. I think we look at the positive side of it. There will be a lot of negative forces acting on the child. It's the law of physics that works on everybody. There are negative forces, but instead of trying to eliminate the negative forces, which we can't, let's try to make the positive forces more powerful. So if our environment is more powerful, the end result, as a physicist or a mathematician would understand, to counter -3, you need a +5. It's as simple as that. And the result would be +2. So we need to be more proactive in implementing methods that generate interest in students rather than worrying about what the government or the society or the parents or the etc. etc.
So I think well said, because that is what is in our hand. So we should kind of focus on what we can do as educators and schools. And why would we even want to send a child in grade 7 or 8 like with no foundational skills? It's going to be a problem even later. So let's focus on building self-esteem in our children and building the foundational skills.